that's why you have to go through, well, Mayor, from what I was told from the same people, that's why you pay someone to go through the dog training. Because you can't have a dog unless someone goes through the proper training in which to have the dog. So being that Officer Phillips had went through the training with the dog, and it wasn't nowhere stated that the dog is now with Officer Mosley or attached to his badge number, that if he was to go out and bite someone, the first person they would contact would be Officer Phillips, being that that dog is attached to Officer Phillips' badge number. Now that he's attached with Officer Mosley's badge number, then that would be the person that direct line of contact would go to, being that he is now the handler.
No, the first person they contact if the dog bit somebody and there was a lawsuit would be me. They would not contact a police officer about liability in a lawsuit. And according to our insurance carrier and Chief Solomon, when he brought the dog in and stood there and shared with us that we were covered for a dog. He didn't say we were covered for a dog with a particular handler. And because Officer Mosley was a United States Army dog handler, he got a heck of a lot more training than Officer Phillips could ever get out here in the civil service. He served in combat zones with dogs, so his training and credentials far supersede. But someone asked, why was he taken off? Officer Phillips has been on sick leave for about a month, and I've shared that with you guys.
No, Mr.
So
Mayor,
what do you think the dog was supposed to be doing?
Mr. Mayor, always
Yes.
said, which I started leading this off by, I thank you for updating the officer and the dog in which the officer, the dog is attached to. So great job on doing that. All we saying is that we as a city have to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's, because before that meeting, if the dog would have went out and bit someone, no one here could say that the city wouldn't have been at a liability at all. Yes, he's covered, but also we had to send an officer to go get trained in order to be the handler of this dog. So we know that Officer Mosley is better fit. I'm glad that he went through more dog training. So hopefully we'll be seeing some results, and hopefully we'll be seeing Officer Mosley anytime here now. But
And
So
we can actually put him in front of council if we'll go to the next item.
I have two questions.
As he comes back, we
I
can,
have two questions real quick, Mr. Mayor.
excuse me? He's way off? Okay, well, he's policing, so when he, if and when he finishes. Go ahead, Councilman.
Attorney Griffin, can you help us in reference to, will we need to look in, I guess if we can ask you to look into the legal liability in reference to having the K-9 in it, to make sure the city of Prairie has the appropriate,
So technically, since this item is under the purview of the mayor, under your charter, if the mayor were to direct the attorney's office to check in with TML and make sure what has to be, what dots have to be, what I's need to be dotted and T's crossed to make sure that dog handler are covered together or separately or whatever, we would be happy to do that at the direction of the mayor.
did we also, is this, again, 3 weeks ago, we talked about whether we're going to, are we gonna save this for a budget? On whether we're gonna keep the K-9 or is this, or were you having additional conversations?
I went to ask Officer Mosley what is his direct plan. Being that our dog, JJ, how many calls you said this received, or do you know?
I have no idea.
Officer Ross, do you happen to know how many times our dog has been called to do, requested to do any K-9 work?
It's been quite a few times now since he's been handling. He's made quite a few scenes for multiple agencies throughout the county. I've got some data boy letter from Waller City PD where he did some K-9 work this weekend for the Freedom Festival. So he's been getting put to use and been a great asset to the city since he's been assigned to a new area.
Also, could we request a report, and could subsequent next meeting discipline the K-9 dog and how many calls?
Sure.
And just a breakdown to see that, being that we're about to go into our budget, it's something to see, because we didn't think we was about to spend $3,000 on a dog, and so we want to make sure in which the amount that we're paying for a dog, that in the near future, hopefully, you guys could get a contract with the university or whatever the case may be. But if council doesn't see different, I'm not sure if council would, or the city of Prairie, if it would be smart financially to continue to move forward with a dog.
I guess, because we were told that, the dog makes stops, busts and stuff like that, and we would want those numbers too. So we want to know if like, from any of the activity, the dog has generated any money, so good, going out to the Freedom Fest is good for the show, but, that's not, we didn't get the dog for the show, we got the dog to do police work. And so that's what was told to us, I'm only repeating what was told to me. We want to be able to have some solid paper documents to be able to make a good decision. I'll move that we move on.
Officer Ross, if you would, make sure he incorporates the one he shared with me last week about the traffic stop where he assisted, I think it was DPS, and the dog smelled a gun and drugs in the doors of the car, so get that to us. I think his was a sub-report because he was assisting, but yeah, if you'll get that to us. Counsel, you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we get on with our agenda.
Second. Take no action.
Item 12. Discuss and take action on the detailed process and procedures by Mayor Allen on the hiring of Officer Den and Officer Ross. Councilman Wallace.
So once again, agenda items 11 and 12 are subsequent because of the meeting that we had last week. So one of the concerns was the city of Prairie View has a process in which they hire police officers, and we want to make sure that every officer goes through that process as all the other ones that are already hired have gone through. So with Officer Den and Officer Ross, first question I have is, do you know exactly when did they start their process?
No, not as I see here.
Around Officer Ross.
Sure.
Good question. Do you know when Officer Den started his process to be hired in the Prairie View Police Department?
Oh, I might be able to help you. I'm sorry. I do have some paperwork. Ms. Tisdale, would somebody cut your mic off? If you're not, okay. Ms. Tisdale, would you come forward? I did try to get some of this information. I don't know how to interpret it all, so I'll have Ms. Tisdale do that. That way she may be able to answer some of those specific dates and questions that you have. Go ahead.
Okay, these are some documents. This is for Officer Den, and I'll start with Councilman Brian, there, you just pass it around. These are copies of TCO required documents. There's what we have, and you can see the starting date. Those are just copies of documents. TCO required documents.
And T-Code is the Texas Commission on Law
Yeah,
Enforcement.
Texas Commission on Law
Just to make sure that-
So those are copies of his document. We have the same thing on Officer Ross.
Y'all been had those documents?
Yes, in
So-
file, yes.
Okay, and so the reason why is because this is on the agenda, and so these are documents that we would love to look over before the councilman, especially because this is an agenda item. That's fine, can you continue?
And this is for Officer Ross.
Well, we should have more than one copy, first of all. Like, part of this being an agenda item, we should have got the proper document to be able to talk about this. This whole, I don't, what are we doing, Mr. Mayor?
Well, what you're looking at is because of federal identity theft privacy laws, there's a lot of personal information, a lot of personal family information in what is required on a police officer. So having multiple copies of all that is not something that, so if you want to say there's one copy, you can blame that on me.
Mr.
But
Mayor,
if you want to look at it, you want to bring this back and you have an opportunity, but
I don't think we need
I
to
don't
take
like-
this with us, but I'm simply saying there should have been enough copies printed so we can look at it, ask any subsequent questions, and give you the documents back. I don't know why we continue to act like you're the only one who have top secret security clearance. We all are the same elected officials, and so we would hope that we would move forward in the process, that we would have enough to be able to ask questions. All we're trying to do is get the process on moving forward.
Okay, so Ms. Tisdale, my first question was, do you know when Officer Den started his process?
I would need to look at that form and,
this is packet, that you can ask some questions.
and this is an applicant, Officer Ross recommended. here.
So
Okay,
his date of hire is what you,
his date of
This question.
hire will be, okay, June the 14th. That's the date of hire. And that's actually the date he was appointed. Now, when the process started will be when Officer Ross started to gather all the information that was needed to put him in the system.
Yeah, and I
So
guess
that would be prior to the 14th.
And that's what I'm asking, do you know when that process started, when they started getting all the information? Because, so right now I have, the Prairie View Police Department hiring and selection policy. The effective date was January 25th, 2017, under Chief Solomon. And so it's an 8-page document of all the different things, within the hiring and selection process. So that's why I'm asking, do you know around what time, when?
Well, I can say that this information, it was submitted on the 14th, but the information and the required information was given to Officer Ross. Required paperwork was given to him prior to the 14th. I can't say exactly what that date was,
Okay.
but it was prior to the 14th.
Are you saying that,
The-
thank you, Mr. Tisdale, one for helping, but are you saying that it,
See, it was not a regular hiring process where you go through a committee and all of this. This is someone that Officer Ross recommended.
so he did?
And so he was told of the required documents needed, and then he had together all of the required documents.
Okay. So I guess let me ask questions based upon the officers that I've seen join and be a part of our task force. Usually we see an officer once, and then they come back before to get sworn in. So what made that process so different for Officer Dent?
Because he was hired up under a different process than, when we're looking for officers, and I think you might have, 3 or 4 officers that interview, and they go through an interview board, and then an officer is selected, and then we start processing the paperwork. Well,
and this was, I'm sorry, and this was a little different because we
Different.
looked up and we had 3 or 4 officers out on sick leave. We need city coverage. So this decision I was involved in when I'm overseeing the police department and I'm seeing that we're short of officers and we've got officers being recommended. Officer Ross did the background investigation and he did the application, filled out all the necessary T-code paperwork. But bringing him in was a little different because our situation was a little different.
How
We were
was it,
short.
how was it different, Mr. Mayor? Our policy does not say, it says, what we're asking questions is because we want to know, did we go through the proper process to hire Officer Dent? You're saying no because we had this emergency that we never knew anything about.
No, I'm not saying we didn't go through. Ms. Tisdale just shared with you, we have every piece of documentation.
No, not
On
documentation.
Officer
The
Dent.
process is
Hold
not
on.
documentation.
Hold
If you
on.
didn't have the committee, if you didn't go through everything that the policy
Under what-
says you're supposed to do.
Under what circumstances do you have to have the committee, do you know? You keep mentioning the committee. The committee says if you've got more than one applicant, you have to have a committee, if you have more than one. We had one applicant, and I needed a position filled. It does not require me to have a committee of 3 read the policy because we
But
follow.
is that the case when you have Officer Booms at the back? That's another application that was sent in either before or around the same time as Officer
was-
Dent.
No, I don't, I see Officer
before.
Den and Officer Ross on agenda.
Okay, but.
We're not getting
All right,
off
you're right.
who's on agenda.
Excuse me from stating his name, but since we have 2 officers here, we had an officer that applied either before or at the same time as Officer Den. And so, since Officer Den's name is on our agenda, we're asking about why was his process different from the other officers?
But that you would have to ask former Chief Solomon.
No, he didn't.
Because,
come in
what,
as-
hold on, let's, hold on.
I'm sorry.
Yes, May 20th, would have been Chief Solomon, because Chief Solomon left on May 24th. So, hold on, all of the background paperwork with the other officer that you're referring to, I had nothing to do with. For whatever reason, he had not started work here. And when Officer Den came in and we had a shortage, I hired him, which is my job in making sure the city runs, especially in between meetings. So I hired him.
So why wasn't the city informed? Mayor, time after time, I think council has asked for just to be on the same page, just so if something happened, Councilman Brian could leave out of this meeting and say the same thing. I, myself, Ms. Williams, Councilman Zante, why we could all be upon the same page. When we left that meeting that day, we thought that Officer Den was a part of that original group. Comes to find out he wasn't. Why didn't you take the time out to say, hey, here's an update upon our police task force. We had to get in Officer Den at this time, so that way we won't feel like it was rushed or something was trying to be
Sneaked in?
Well, let me tell you about sneaking.
Hold
Hold on.
My question wasn't that.
The gentleman came right in front of you, and you're talking about he was sneaked in? He was sworn in front of you. And you're acting like you never saw him before.
We never seen him
That's
before that day.
ridiculous.
We know he wasn't part of the three.
We trusted you in the process.
We thought just like when Chief Solomon was here, he was one of the 3 people who was vetted through the process. What you end up doing
You're yelling
is,
into the microphone. I'm just saying so loud. You can go ahead.
Not the truth. I said,
we had 3 officers that we had approved through the process. The chief brought them back after he brought them through the process. We thought those are the 3 that Chief Solomon had brought to us. Well, what we come to find out that we don't know now because you put blame on Chief Solomon, so we don't know if that's you or Chief Ross at the time who put Officer Den in this lineup that we're thinking part of the 3, and knowing that they had just not even gone through the process that's identified in our policy manual. And so we're simply saying, you keep saying you want to blame Chief Solomon for this thing, then you want to say, well, I take full responsibility. We're saying that we have a policy, a process. You have the right to select who you want, but we're saying that the process, this is not about who you picked. The process, you want to know what
I
it
want
is?
you to state, because process is like all encompassing.
We have a manual.
Say exactly.
It says the Prairie Police Department Hire and Selection Manual, Section 7B, and it talks about what should happen. There's some things that some officers have went through. There's some things what we're finding out that some officers haven't went through.
Be specific, which item was not followed, so we can be following you.
When Officer Ross came in, he didn't have a background check. And I don't see no background check in that paperwork that you just gave us, so where is it?
Officer Ross' background check started with him being an active sworn officer in an adjacent area. And a couple of days later, I'm telling you what I did. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. What I'm telling you is this is what happened.
But that's not our process. I don't want to hear what you did. I want you to follow our process. It says,
he was an active sworn officer in another agency, and we had an emergency, and my job was to declare under Chief Solomon leaving sooner than he had planned to, or at least sooner than he informed me he would. And I needed someone in here, some of which I've shared with council that we can't get into publicly. So there's information you have, and you're really misleading the public, because there's some reasons why some of the people that you wanted to have.
I don't want
Yes, you
anybody.
did.
I don't have any specific person. My question was, last week, you said that you did a background check on Officer Ross. Now you're saying the other department did it in another city. And we're simply saying.
I did one.
So we asked, where is it?
May 26th.
Where's the document? That's all we're asking.
Hold on. Did we copy the background checks, Ms. Tisdale, or no?
We have CCH in there.
Would you tell them what that means? Because
The
I don't know.
criminal history.
That's not a,
No, we have background
That's not a
checks in their
background check.
files.
So every officer, so we can bring in any officer, whether you wanted to bring our, officer, there were 2 officers who were identified for doing background checks for the department. It's not something the mayor does, first of all. Second of all, one was Sergeant Garrett and another officer were the 2 officers who did background checks for the Prairie Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. Did any of those 2 officers do background checks on the 2 people we're currently talking about?
No, they was out on sick
I
leave.
want her to, she works in the department.
no,
Right.
Well,
So,
either of them working?
They was out on sick leave.
no.
Okay, if they're out on sick leave, how they gonna do it? I mean, tell people everything.
that is everything.
No,
You're
if they're
making it
not
seem,
here, how they gonna do it?
again,
And
So
I did,
who did you
Hold on.
assign to? I'm trying.
I did Chief Solomon's background check 2 years ago, and you didn't say a thing. So don't tell me the mayor doesn't do background checks.
I asked you for the documentation. You said you have it. So if you have it, just give it to us and be quiet.
Officer Ross, do you have your background check?
Yes.
Okay, would you please for
Thank
Councilman Rowland?
That's what you said last week. I just wanted to, you just always
Well, I thought it
just.
was in the package.
It's
I
not.
don't do, I help make sure it gets done.
Yes, sir.
But I don't touch every piece of paper, but
Okay.
we're running much better than we have in your
Yes, sir.
9 years, so let's be clear.
That's okay, Mr.
Awesome.
Mayor.
Hey, listen,
Yes, Councilman Jones.
I'm sorry, Ms. Tisdale.
Yes, sir.
Was Officer Den, since he recently lived outside the county, did we request record checks through agencies in the applicant's previous communities?
Look at the F5R. Now, it would show his employment history and where he worked. And so a background was completed at every agency where he worked by Officer Ross.
Would that, does that show, the document that Councilman just referenced, was his F5 not in the application where you put who you work for and the phone number? And F5 gives it's the resume, a police officer's resume, that if a police officer was let go or shot somebody or did something would be on that document. Do we have an F5 for Officer Den, and do we have one for Officer Ross?
We have an F5R for Officer Den, and it's in the packet.
What's that package? Okay.
And it was completed by Officer Ross.
Do you know what page, or Officer Ross, do you know what page I'll look on for that document?
This is the first one, FIR is the top document.
This is
We got not discussing that because it was continuous background. Only thing they had to do was, there was no 180-day break, and that's what's stated there. Okay. So.
Let's say that again, I just want the public in the record here.
Your basic questions are about the background. Both officers were continuously working without what they call a 180-day break. So the backgrounds are continuous. In other words, they have secure backgrounds from the time that original background was done. The only thing that needs to be redone is the CCH, which is the criminal history. That was done, and then more. The sheriff's office shared their background with Mayor Allen upon my emergency appointment, and Precinct 2 for Deputy Den was shared with us. Plus, I did another extensive background, and I am qualified to do a background check with Den. And
It's in this
all that
package?
stuff is in there. Yes, sir.
Where would it be at?
Let me see if I can point it out. Sure. Step aside. The first document that you were looking at was that history of employment. That was this one.
So the
I
F5,
just
that's
made
the
a
F,
copy
the
of the
F5R.
Okay.
The F5R, just to be clear, because again, I'm not a police officer. The F5R is just showing you contacted the people. The F5 is the actual document. So where is the F5?
The F5R.
No, the F5R was the second page. That's just that shows the agency and the person who you contacted. The F5 is the actual document that lists anything that may be, so where is that? Because,
Are you going to check for that, Ms. Tisdale?
I'm going to get his file.
Okay.
and so you did the investigation for Officer Den, and you're saying you looked at his F5 and everything was ready. It was you you felt confident that he was a good officer for this department.
Correct.
Oh, where is it?
She's going to be a part of it. What they burned was what you needed for the background, but that specific document would have been included. So when she was requested, she gave it.
Where's the background?
She's going to get it.
Oh, she's gonna get it. So the background wasn't in here?
Not that one, not that part of it. What you needed when you asked for the background.
Because
I
we,
think where everybody's getting kind of thrown
we're
off
getting
is the
confused
note.
that we have everything in front of us and we can't read and all these things. And we're just,
It's just a lot of, some of the, what's going on is some of the documentation that you're asking for is under different names. You're saying background, so when we pull that, and what she gave you was correct, and that was a computer program. Computer printout.
Mr. Mayor, your background.
Okay. So when you were saying the background, that's what we pulled, we do a computer check, and all his background stuff was checked, and he came back clear. Because it was a continuous employment. Less than 180. Okay. So since all that was less than 180, is all he has.
Well, why don't you, Officer Ross, I just want the public to hear what you're saying out of deference, so if you can speak up.
Yes.
That way you, go ahead.
Yes, sir. What we're getting into is the nomenclature of what we're asking for. What Ms. Tisdale gave everybody was the background check, which was the criminal history. Because he had a continuous background as being a police officer with no break, all that was needed was the computer check. And that's what she included. She did exactly as she was asked to do, which was provide the background check and the criminal history, and she did, and it's in here. And so it was just, and so now what he's asking for is the actual interview sheets, and it's just a matter of nomenclature. But both Dan and myself had less than 80-day breaks, which means our original backgrounds that were done were always secure from the time that they did that one until to this date, because there hasn't been any break. In other words, if an officer gets in trouble, we know about it, and that's what it goes on. That's what this original page, what they asked for this meeting, that was provided.
And I don't know if you want to, this is a summary that you did of his background.
In abundance of caution, I actually did an actual background check on Officer Den, just to check into his background, and did the summary, went out, talked with everybody, did the interviews like was supposed to be done, as if he had had a break. And I did the interviews were summarized in this sheet and presented to administration for his hiring. Reason why the other guy wasn't.
Is there anything that
That's
you,
gonna have, because that's his original, but we'll leave that back.
And there are also letter of references. I just didn't make copies of all of this stuff.
sure. Well, no, again, I think the point, particularly for the public as well as council, is just to show we followed the process on both. We got a lot of paperwork on both. And with them having been both long-term law enforcement officers, the process tends to be a little bit different. But I think it's the verbiage that Officer Ross used with nomenclature in the military, we know what he's talking about. But the fact that they were an officer like you, were an officer with Waller County that we're in, and we know you worked there, and literally you left there and came over here the next day with no break in service. And then we did a background, actually we did 2 background checks on you anyway. One on the 26th and another one about 30 days later or so. So, again, just in following the process. Ms. Tisdale, you're very involved in our law enforcement, I'll say, hiring process in processing them in.
Yes.
Is there anything in your experience that has typically been done that wasn't done with either of these 2 officers? Does anything
No.
stand out?
We pretty much follow the same procedure with everybody, because see, you have the hiring policy, and then you have what's required by TICO. So sometimes if there's just 180-day less or break in service, we just only require the TICO documents. You
Because
know?
they're already in the
And that's-
system.
They're already in the system.
But so,
And there's a checklist that we go by.
I got a question, sorry. So let's say, it goes through that 180-day process, but an officer is under investigation in another precinct. Does his file update to show that he's going through?
If he's going through something, then he would have been, when they discharge an officer, he would have got a general discharge or a dishonorable discharge. Then you know, hey, something's going on here. I need to go look in the file, check it out.
Even if the officer is going through investigation, so a verdict hasn't came down, it just might be a possible investigation, it's the same thing?
Let me speak to that one, because that's an investigative function. To answer your question, that's the part that the F5R comes into. Because when we're bringing somebody on, we have to contact the previous agencies. We actually have to make a physical call and contact them for that reason. If they're under investigation, that investigation may not follow, or it may not result in a general discharge. And they may still be honorably discharged, but if we don't call them and contact them, we wouldn't find it out just looking at the F5R. That's why we're required to call them.
And so my original question, you did that for Officer Denton?
I did that for Officer Dan, yes.
Okay.
And I did that for Officer Ross and Chief Solomon.
And then if they have more than 180-day break in service, then there are more documentation required. Now, if they are a brand new officer, new license, and there's even more paperwork required. And this is the checklist. And they update it as, sometimes every year. And so you know what's required for each officer based on their, status.
Council,
I move that we move on with our agenda.
okay.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that, move on with the agenda. Would we state no action on item 12?
I have under this.
Okay.
Did
Councilwoman?
we get the additional documents for Officer Den for the F5? This is Officer Ross's, and this is Officer Ross's.
We have some.
So I'm asking for, so this is what I'm asking, right? Because I don't want us I want us to be very clear. Any employee from the city of Prairie View that knowingly tells a lie or knowingly gives false information would be unclear. And I just want to be clear that when we're asking for, we just wanted to be updated. The information we got from us is what we asked for, and that's okay. We're just asking that the city of Prairie View has a policy and it says we did these things. We were told we did those things. So we should be able to come up here and say, hey, where's the file? Here's the file, see we did this, you have all the information, and we move on.